had drafted 112 contracts for Crispin Hollowell before I understood that working for a man like him required two entirely separate skill sets, the one on my resume and the one I'd had to teach myself in real time. The resume version: contract attorney, Georgetown Law, 2 years at a firm in Chicago before I relocated to New York, for a reason I told people was opportunity, and that was actually something closer to a clean start. Competent with commercial real estate, meticulous with deadline management, unremarkable at office small talk. The real version: I had learned to read a room in the time it took the elevator to reach the 41st floor. I had learned that Crispin Hollowell's silence meant more than most men's speeches. I had learned that when he asked a question, he already knew the answer. He was watching to see if I did. 2 years, 730 mornings of arriving before he did, because that was the only way to be ready. I managed the document pipeline for every major acquisition. Hollowell Capital ran, which meant I sat outside his corner office, knew which contracts had nothing interesting on their surface and everything worth protecting underneath, and had developed a finely calibrated sense of when to speak and when to simply solve the problem without announcing that it had existed. The firm occupied 3 floors of a glass tower on Park Avenue, all pale stone and deliberate restraint, the kind of space that announced wealth without needing to shout it. My office was small but positioned correctly. From my desk I could see the elevator bank, the reception area, and the corridor to Crispin's office, which mattered because visibility, in that world, was a form of competence. That Tuesday in March, I was 3 paragraphs into a title indemnity clause on the Hudson Yards acquisition, when Mona appeared in my doorway, holding 2 coffees and wearing the expression she saved for when something had already happened and she was trying to gauge how much I knew. "There's something at the front desk for you," she said. "Leave it with reception." "It's past reception." Bauer brought it up himself. That made me look up. Aldous Bauer was Hollowell Capital's head of corporate security. Ex-Army, 9 years with Crispin, impossible to read. Bauer did not personally carry deliveries. The fact that he had meant the package had flagged something he didn't want to hand off. "What is it?" Mona set my coffee on the edge of my desk. A watch box, navy velvet, no branding, no return address on the outer packaging. The card is inside, sealed. I thought through every client I'd worked with recently, every closing dinner, every handshake at a signing table. Nobody owed me a gift. Gifts at closings went through compliance review. A nice bottle of wine and a thank you note were the acceptable ceiling. A sealed watch box delivered by the head of security was not within that ceiling. Bauer entered, set the box on my desk with careful hands, and slid an unsealed envelope beside it. "Outer packaging arrived by courier at 7:48, he said. "Courier's company is legitimate. They received it from an individual at their Midtown drop-off location at 7:22. We're reviewing the security footage now." The card was sealed inside the box. He paused. "I recommend reading it before you touch anything else." The card was heavy cream stock. The handwriting was precise, unhurried, the kind that suggested someone who wrote by hand regularly and wanted you to notice it. "For the woman who makes every floor she walks worth building. I've admired you from a distance long enough. D." I read it twice, then I set it down and looked at the box. "Open it," Mona said, from the doorway, where she was definitely not supposed to still be standing. Inside, nested in silk, was a vintage watch, small, elegant, clearly very old. The kind of piece that showed up in a Christie's catalog and sold for amounts that made your chest do something strange. It was beautiful in the underplayed way of things that had been kept rather than displayed. "That's a Patek Philippe," Mona said. "Vintage Calatrava. Adira, that watch is worth more than my car. Possibly more than my car and my apartment combined." I was still looking at the card D. "Has Mr. Hollowell been told?" I asked Bauer. "He's been told a package arrived for you and was flagged for review." A careful pause. He asked to be updated. Which meant, in the translation I'd spent 2 years developing, that Crispin Hollowell was already aware that something had occurred inside his firm that he didn't yet fully understand, and he was waiting to see how I handled it before he decided what to do. I closed the box. "Tell him I'll come to him." His office was always colder than the rest of the floor. I'd stopped noticing it after the first 6 months, the way you stop noticing anything that's simply true about a space. But that morning, the difference felt more pronounced than usual. Crispin stood with his hands flat on his desk, reading something on his screen. He was 41, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that had gone gray at the temples in the time I'd been there. The kind of change you only noticed if you'd been looking at the same person for long enough. He dressed in a uniform of charcoal and navy and the occasional deep green that his previous assistant had apparently once made the mistake of commenting on directly. He did not like to be caught being noticed. I set the box and the card on his desk. It arrived at 7:48, I said. No return address. The courier received it from an individual at their midtown drop-off. Bauer is reviewing footage. The card says D. He read the card once. His jaw tightened, a small movement, controlled, happening just beneath the surface of whatever expression he was wearing. Have you received anything else? Messages? Calls? No, this is the first. And you don't recognize the handwriting? No. He picked up the card by its edges and placed it in the intake folder Bauer had already positioned on his desk. He'd started a file before I walked in. Someone sent you an $85,000 watch, he said, his voice carefully flat, to this office, addressed to you personally. I'm aware of what happened, Mr. Hollowell. He looked at me then, and I saw it, the thing I'd been cataloging in pieces for months without letting myself name it. Not professional assessment, not anger. Something raw and barely managed that he was actively working to push back down. It's a security issue, he said. Someone knows it enough about you to identify where you work, to send something calculated and expensive and entirely inappropriate, and to feel confident enough to do so without identifying themselves. That makes it a firm matter. I agree it's a firm matter. Then you'll let Bauer run the full protocol. Of course. And you won't respond to anything connected to this. No messages, no calls, no follow-up without telling me first. Phrased as policy, wrapped in security protocol, but I had learned to hear what lived underneath. You want to be informed, I said. I want you to be safe. He said it, and then stopped, as if the sentence had come out differently than he intended. The silence lasted about 3 seconds. Then he picked up his phone, which meant the conversation was, professionally speaking, finished. I took the box and left. Mona found me in the break room, 20 minutes later. Walk me through that face, she said, closing the door. What face? The one you're making right now. The face of a person who just had a conversation, where 12 things were said, and only 4 of them were words. I wrapped both hands around my mug. He said it was a security issue, and then he said he wanted me to be safe. I paused, like that was different, like it slipped. She was quiet for a moment, which was genuinely unusual for her. Adira. Bauer told someone in admin that Hollowell was in the security office at 7:55. That's 3 minutes after the package arrived. He was already there, before anyone requested a footage review, which means he had standing instructions. Someone told Bauer to flag unusual contact directed at you, specifically on an ongoing basis. I thought about that. When? I said. That's the part I don't know. She held my gaze. I'm saying this with full love and also full honesty. Men who run operations like this have reasons for everything they do, and those reasons don't always look the same from the inside as they do from the outside. Just keep your eyes open. They're open, I said. And they were. That was precisely the problem. The answer came 4 days later. Bauer called me into the security office at 8 a.m. Crispin was already there, on the table. A folder, a laptop, and photographs. I could immediately see were surveillance stills from outside this building, and 2 other locations I recognized immediately. The watch was sent by Drummond Sinclair, Crispin said before I'd fully sat down. The name landed the way industry names do when you've been reading them in opposing counsel positions for 2 years. Sinclair Development Group. Aggressive acquisition tactics. The kind of firm that appeared in about 1/3 of the adverse party lines on deals I reviewed. He's been watching you since October, Bauer said, sliding the folder across. These are from the coffee shop on 49th you go to on Thursday mornings. These are from the gym in your building. He's been there as a guest 6 times since November. These are from the restaurant where you have lunch with your colleague on Fridays. Ordinary photographs in the worst possible way. Me at the coffee counter. Me on a treadmill. Me and Mona at the window table I'd chosen because it got good light. How long have you known? I asked. The question was for Crispin. Since December. December, 3 months. Why didn't you tell me? Because until the watch arrived, I had no actionable evidence of intent. Sinclair is careful. He kept himself just outside any line that justified disclosure. He paused, and because telling you would have required explaining how I knew, and explaining how I knew required a conversation I wasn't ready to have. A conversation about what? He held my gaze. About the fact that I've had standing security protocols in place around you since last spring, that your clearance level, the documents you access, the deals you manage, made you a potential target in a routine threat assessment, and that I acted on that assessment, a beat, extensively. The last word sat there. Sinclair, I said, redirecting. What does he want? Bauer pulled up the next page. The Hudson Yards acquisition. Specifically, the Port Authority relationships embedded in the infrastructure partnership agreements. The priority permitting access those relationships provide is worth more than the land itself. If he obtains the framework, he can replicate the deal structure and potentially displace Hollowell Capital as lead developer on a project valued at $2.8 billion. And he thinks I'm the way in. You drafted 3 of the 8 core agreements, Crispin said, and you hold vault access credentials. He's not wrong that I have access, I said slowly. He's wrong about what I'd do with it. I looked at Crispin directly. Let him approach me. Both men looked at me. If I meet with Sinclair and he makes an explicit offer, you have something actionable. You have it on record. You shut this down cleanly, without starting a war over a watch and some surveillance photos. Crispin's jaw set, no. Crispin. No, quiet, which made it worse than loud would have. I'm not using you as bait. Then what's the alternative? You freeze him out, he escalates. He finds another angle, or he manufactures one. This ends it. I kept my voice level. You have your entire security team, a documented chain of evidence, and me, who can handle one dinner conversation with a real estate developer. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Because from where I'm sitting, the only reason not to take the smart play is if the goal is protecting me from knowing I'm already at risk. Which I am, regardless of what we decide in this room. The silence was long enough that Bauer found something to examine on the far side of the table. Finally, Crispin looked at me. You're not going to stop. Not until we make the right call. Those are not always the same thing. They are this time. He agreed, conditionally. A gallery opening that Friday, invitation only, a space where Sinclair would have no tactical advantage. Bauer's team embedded, everything recorded. The 2 days before felt different in ways I couldn't entirely account for. Crispin called me into his office more often than the work required, always on a pretext that could have been resolved by email. On the second day, he set down a lease amendment mid-review and said, without looking up, "You read the footnotes before the body of the document. The footnotes are where people bury the things they don't want to negotiate. I know. I noticed it your 3rd week here." He set the amendment down. "You take lunch in exactly 47 minutes. Tuesdays you always order the same thing. Fridays you never do. You keep 3 pens in your jacket pocket and you replace them before they run out, not after." He looked up. "You've worn the same gray coat every day this winter. Not because you only have one, I've seen others. Because the gray one has a pocket deep enough for your tablet." My breath caught slightly. "You've been watching me." "I've been aware of you." He said it like there was a meaningful distinction, and then seemed to understand from my expression that I wasn't accepting the distinction. He stood. 2 years ago, when I had the threat assessment run, it was protocol. By 6 months in, it wasn't protocol anymore. He came around the desk. "By the time Sinclair started following you to coffee shops, it had nothing to do with the firm." "Then what did it have to do with?" He stopped close enough that I had to hold my ground. With the fact that you walked into my conference room on your first day and challenged an indemnification clause I had personally drafted before you'd been in the building for 45 minutes. And you were right. Something shifted in his expression. I had not been challenged by someone I respected since. He stopped. He didn't say his wife's name. I didn't ask him to. I built every protocol around you, he said, because I could not afford for something to happen to you and call it a security matter, because it has never been a security matter. His hand came up and curved briefly around my jaw. It has always been this. Dira, he said, just barely, a shorter version of my name that he'd never used before, and it landed differently than anything else he'd said. I kissed him. Not planned, not calculated. Just the simplest action available after 2 years of reading a room and finally understanding what the room was saying. His hands came up and framed my face, and he kissed me back like something he'd been holding with enormous care and was now, finally, setting down. When we stepped apart, his forehead rested against mine. This complicates Friday, he said. Friday was already complicated. Julia, Adira. He pulled back enough to see my face. If he touches you, if anything feels wrong, you signal Bauer immediately. Don't try to manage it. I know. Promise me. I promise. I caught his hand briefly. Trust me to do the job. A long exhale. The job was easier before it involved you. Nothing involving me has ever been easy. You knew that 45 minutes in. Something close to a real smile crossed his face, one of the ones that lived only just at the corner of his mouth. No, he said, it wasn't. The gallery was all white walls and deliberate lighting, the kind of space designed to make whatever was inside look more important than it might otherwise be. I wore a borrowed dress, midnight blue, not something I'd have picked, but right for the room. Drummond Sinclair found me in 8 minutes. He was more silver-haired than his photos, with an easy smile designed to register as warmth. He introduced himself like we were strangers meeting by coincidence, and I let him build that fiction. Adira Wells, he said, I'd hoped you'd be here. I didn't realize my attendance was circulating. I have good sources. He handed me a glass of something cold and white. I hope the watch arrived safely. It did. I held his gaze. I wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. He guided us toward a quieter section of the gallery, smooth and unhurried, and I moved with him because the angle was better for Bauer's team. I believe in being direct with intelligent people, so I'll be direct. I need information that currently lives in Hollowell Capital's document vault. Specific information, the Port Authority relationship structure for Hudson Yards. The permitting framework. I know you drafted those agreements. You want me to steal proprietary work product from my employer. I want to compensate you fairly for knowledge you already hold. You don't need to remove a single file. I'm proposing a consulting conversation, the kind attorneys have between firms routinely, when they aren't bound by standing confidentiality obligations. He tilted his head. I'm prepared to offer $200,000 for the conversation, and a position at Sinclair Development that would make Hollowell Capital look, in retrospect, like a useful detour. There it was, clean, explicit, and fully recorded. That's a very generous offer, I said. You're worth a generous offer. I'll need some time to consider it. Of course, he touched my arm, brief and proprietary. I'm patient. I excused myself toward the bar, walked 6 feet, and stopped directly in front of Crispin. He was standing near a large abstract canvas, harsh blacks and whites, a stripe of deep red cutting through the center, and he had been watching the entire conversation. His expression was controlled, by a smaller margin than usual. He made the offer, I said quietly. I heard. Every word, on record. He looked at me for a moment, and in the deliberate gallery lighting, I could see the exact measure of the thing he was managing. Then his hand found the small of my back, not brief, not a gesture calibrated for professional plausibility, just present. We end this, he said. Bauer's team intercepted Sinclair at the coat check. He didn't make a scene. Men like him rarely did in spaces with witnesses. The filing went in Monday morning. Attempted solicitation of proprietary information, corporate espionage conspiracy, and enough ancillary evidence from 6 months of surveillance documentation to keep a federal case moving for a very long time. 3 weeks later, Mona sat across from me at our usual Friday table and asked me, directly and without preamble, whether I had made a fully informed decision with both eyes open. Yes, I said. He runs a firm that operates in significant legal gray areas. I know, I've read the documents. And you are comfortable with that? I am comfortable with a man who spent 2 years building protocols to protect me before he ever admitted he had a reasons to, who chose legal exposure over eliminating a problem more permanently because his grandmother asked him to be better than his industry expected, and who has been honest with me since we had an explicit agreement that he would be. I looked at her. I'm not comfortable with every aspect of his world. I told him that. He told me things that were difficult to hear. That's the version I'm choosing, the one with full information and no omissions, not a fantasy. Mona picked up her coffee. Fine, she said, but he better be worth it. I'm holding him to that, I said, daily. That evening I sat in Crispin's office, at the kind of late hour when the rest of the floor had gone quiet. A lease integration memo on the table between us. Takeout containers losing their warmth. The city outside the windows was doing what it always did, moving, building, demolishing, and beginning again. The footnotes, I said. He looked up. That was your tell. You noticed that I read them first, and you didn't ask me about it, you just filed it away. That's when I knew you'd been paying attention. He set down his pen. You didn't say anything. Neither did you. No. Something opened in his expression, the controlled surface giving way the way a window gives way to the actual view behind it. I suppose we've spent 2 years being fluent in the wrong language. We're speaking the right one now. He reached across the desk and covered my hand with his, not briefly, not as a gesture calibrated for any audience. He just held it. The way you hold something you've decided to stop being careful with. Outside, 41 floors down, the city did what it always had. But the office, for the first time since I'd taken the job, for the first time since I'd arrived on that first morning, before I understood what kind of world I was walking into, or what kind of man was at the center of it, felt exactly like the right temperature.